Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar of Jack, Nate, Joe, and myself. My name is Joerg. I'm the host for today's webinar. I lead up the marketing team here at LeadIQ. I'm excited to be the host today, and I'll introduce the speakers shortly. But before we do that, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping items. While I go through housekeeping items, feel free to drop in where you're dialing in from today, as well as what's your favorite sales tool. You get extra points if you mention LeanData, LeadIQ, and Gong. Since this is part 2 of our webinar, I just wanted to quickly run a poll to see who attended the last webinar. Anthony, if we can launch the poll. All right.
Oh, nice. All right. Cool.
Looks like we have a bunch of new people here. We'll definitely share the recording of part 1 in the follow-up email, but we also have some quick takeaways from the last webinar that I'm going to go through in just a moment. But before I go through the recaps for part 1 of the webinars, I'm just going to quickly ask our speakers to introduce themselves. Joe, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Joe. I'm an enterprise SDR manager at LeanData. I've been there for a little over 2 years. Yeah, I love the people I work with, love nerding out on sales development. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate Robbins. I'm based in Salt Lake City, Utah, but in Chicago this week, actually visiting the team at a WeWork office just next door to where I'm at. Been at Gong for about 3 years and sales development and business development for about 8 years. And I lead the East team as the director over here at Gong. Happy to be back.
And Jake?
Nice. Yeah. Good to see you, Joe and Nate. Good to see you again. Everyone, Jack Doheny here. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I saw some people in the chat in like the Denver Boulder area too. So awesome to see. Feel free to add me. We've got some cool meetups that we do here locally, especially in the SaaS sales side. But yeah, I've been in the e-com SaaS world for about 4 years now. I started as an SDR in the e-com side at Grin, and I moved my way up the ladder, and now I've been an AE for about 2 years now. And now I work at a company called Inveterate, and we work again in the e-com tech side. But I was a merchant myself before for about 6 years before here. So been on both sides of the aisle, and it's fun to just rip sales all day long. So we got some fun stuff today, and we're excited to share.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for the introductions. Gonna jump ahead and highlight some key takeaways from our last webinar. Again, this is part 2 today. Part 1, some of the key takeaways, I couldn't fit all of them on one screen, so I highly encourage that you listen to the recording. But key takeaways, number 1 is really pay attention to what you put in the first few lines of your outbound sequence. People start to pay attention to the first few lines and then skim and read less and less. Key takeaway from Nate and one of our other speakers was also be consistent with your outbound sequences. Don't just do 1 or 2 or 3 touches, but really go through the full sequence, which should be up to 7+ touches. Another key takeaway from one of our other speakers was running outbound sequences is very much a data problem. You look at the sequences, you look at the conversion points, you look at the A/B tests you run. So really do a lot of A/B testing and do it frequently, test a lot of things. Again, consistency in your sequences and following sequences. That was one of the other key takeaways. Again, watch the part 1. We have the recording shared here. Questions that we didn't answer during last webinar. One of the questions was around how to warm up your inbox, especially for outbound sequences. So I'm going to hand this over to Jack to quickly walk us through it, how he's done it before.
Yeah, sure thing. We're a relatively new startup in the space. So we've only been doing outbound for the better part of 9 months. And so early stage, when you're starting to do a new email domain, we use a tool called MailReach to warm up that email inbox so that you're not triggering spam filters with Gmail right off the bat. Because obviously you do want to be doing a fair amount of volume with your outreach to start building pipeline and bringing new opportunities to the table. But if you really take a heavy outbound approach with a email address that has not been warmed up, utilizing a tool like MailReach or others, you can run into domain credibility issues. And you can actually have that email domain that you're using be sent to spam more often than not. So we encountered that early stage with the company with our specific domain. And so we actually started a secondary domain, which was just try, and then our company name after that .com. So I would certainly encourage people when they're first starting, if they're an early stage company or like kind of sales leaders that are out there, to focus on warming up that email. And I'm curious too on Nate's take on this too, just because I know he's in the kind of management side too. And I'm sure he's encountered this in the past.
Yeah, I think warming up the inbox, especially for a newer startup, like that's what's the most relevant. I think you got to make sure that there's enough going out to, ahead of your core coming in. I don't know if you're aware, there's a lot of Gmail regulations coming that's going to make warming even more important. Things around the volume of email, the frequency of the email coming out, spam rates are actually being reduced even further. So if you're getting tracked for spam already, it's going to get a lot worse for you come February 1st of 2024. There are a couple of thresholds changing, but one of the most notables is you'll only have a 0.3% spam tolerance starting then. So if you're getting kicked to spam a lot, it's going to kill you really fast. So warming up the inbox is incredibly important.
Awesome. Moving on to the second question from our last webinar. This is around including links in outbound emails. What's your take on that? Joe, I'll hand it to you first.
Yeah. I've always been a big fan of having my calendaring link or my AE's calendar link in my signature. Sometimes when you're writing a personalized email and doing a lot of heavy research, you structure your call to action, just piques some interest. And that's where, if you're not including a link in your email, it's always good to have a way in that email for the prospect to kind of book time. Yeah, big fan of it.
Any takes on that?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think including your calendar link in your email signature is a great strategy, especially with a low pressure ask call to action at the end of your email. I would caution having a lot of links in your email signature besides your calendar link. So that would be something like a link to the website, a link to your LinkedIn, a link to maybe your phone number for app calling or anything like that. If you consider in your outbound emails, you have about 3 slots to put any type of extra content besides just text. So that could be something like a photo or something like a video that has a GIF image to it and a hyperlink to maybe an example of a live customer or an example, a link to a case study or something like that. I would encourage most people to reduce the volume of external content of those ones that I mentioned before to 3 or less. And if you're including a link to your calendar in your signature, that's taking up one of those slots. And again, this is all in the spirit of avoiding spam filters and making sure that you have deliverability to get to that inbox. And if you have excessive content outside of just text, that can sometimes trigger some of those too. But I'll love to hear Nate's take on it too.
Definitely think as few links as possible. And the signature is one that will catch you, because a lot of times you've got your marketing team or someone who's put together a signature for you. They want you to put the HTML formatting in. It's got to look universal. But if it includes an image of your face, candidly, we love your faces, but it's probably not really that important. If you can sub out your face for something that's actually going to provide value, definitely do that. So take a look at your signature. Also make sure it's not too large of a file size or anything that's in there, because that'll trigger you as well. And you may be swapping out no value for something that could add value. The booking link specifically, I think if you're going outbound and you're creating demand, you're not just capturing existing demand, but you're actually trying to generate demand. You should let your CTA elicit the response, not a booking link, because if you are going outbound, sending them a link, very unlikely they're going to click on the first email anyway. You're trying to get a response from that email. So in the first email, I wouldn't necessarily have a booking link unless you're following up on a lead or someone else who's shown interest before. Then maybe the link makes sense to add in there, but that's my take on it.
Thank you guys for the insights. Let's get into the meat of today's webinar. Before we do that, let's launch a quick poll. The question is here: what's your biggest challenge when segmenting your sequences? Let's see what the answers are. While we wait for the answers, my question for our speakers today is: how do you think about segmenting your sequences? Do you segment your sequences by personas, behavior, industries? Joe, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we look at a few different things here with LeanData. We use LeanData at LeanData. Not really big a surprise there. For our demo requesters, we have a demo request sequence where LeanData kind of auto sequences into them. That way the SDRs don't really have to do any work. They can just see who requested a demo, take a look at the comment, and then get the email out. But we also segment by priority and then ICP as well. So we go after a few different personas here, and you layer in priority on top of that. So we're really trying to make sure that if it's a high priority prospect, maybe someone that was part of the closed one logo in the past and moved to a new company, we call that virality here. We'll throw them into a more high priority manual cadence where you're doing a lot of personalized touches. You have more control over the sequence. And then we recently added some automated sequences. So in enterprise, where my team focuses specifically, there's a lot of really interesting looking titles, but you're not quite sure the relevance of that title until you talk to them. So we'll plug them into an automated sequence, see if some of the emails start to get some opens. And then as they start to show engagement and intent, we'll plug them into a manual sequence and then start to spend more time on them and personalize from there. But yeah, we look at all the typical stuffs, right? The firmographic, demographic, if they're part of a closed loss before, but all that stuff. And we try to use LeanData to kind of auto sequence as much as possible from events as well. So we have an event sequence as well. Yeah, I'd love to hear the other guys' takes on this as well.
Jake, how do you tackle segmenting your sequences?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm coming from an e-commerce space perspective over here. So a lot of merchants that I'm doing outreach to are brands. So you consider different categories, whether that be a food and beverage brand, an apparel brand, a cosmetics brand, or something like that. So typically I'm going to utilize live examples of similar prospects in their category that have seen some success and having my segmentation tailored to that. When it comes to segmenting via the individual as well, so that ICP prospect that I'm reaching out to, I'm certainly going to segment my approach and my value propositions differently to VP marketing as opposed to maybe an e-commerce manager. There are going to be intricacies related to whether the value propositions that they're looking for as opposed to another. And then on that segmentation too, really putting them into probably that first or second touch being relatively personalized. And then once I'm starting to see engagement from the sequences that I'm putting out, further segmenting those particular prospects of maybe some automated sequences and into a little bit more higher touch, intentional actions and activity based on open rates, click-through rates, and things like that. So I would say step one segmentation would be the genre of the brand that I'm reaching out to and the case studies that I have from there. And then phase two would be engagement. So if they're engaging a lot with a particular sequence or email that I'm sending out, maybe pausing them in a higher touch, lower personalization and moving them into a higher personalized thing that would involve calling, LinkedIn messaging, individual manual emails for each.
Definitely heavy plus on a lot of things they said. The dynamic sequencing part is our flow, putting people into flow, I think is a massive part that a lot of people are working on. Not to push too much on the engage from Gong piece, but that's something that's on our roadmap as well. So you'll actually have all your interactions. We'll recommend the next step for them in real time. But enough about that. I think that this is something that I think gets passed over too quickly because you stand up a new sales engagement platform. You want to get all these different plays out there as quick as you can. You got messaging for this person, that person, that can go crazy. So I think it's important that before you roll it out, you come to this with a really strong opinion on your space, your target accounts, your ICP, and you organize your flows in a way that you can, from an SDR leader lens, that you can maximize their daily tasks. And what I mean by that is set it up in a way that they can know exactly how many people to put into a specific type of sequence or flow without in 2 or 3 weeks getting way behind on their tasks and creating a huge gap in the timing of their steps. Things get overdue, they skip them, and then you don't have the true effectiveness of the flow. So I think it's way too easy for reps to get big eyes and overload themselves with all this great information they just found. And then 2-3 days later, when the next step is, they've done it to themselves again. I think it's important that you start with the type of prospecting you're doing, whether it's going to be hyper-personalized, whether it's going to be a value drip messaging, or potentially even just a warning for an account before you actually go in. I personally have set things up in the past is we'll have one hyper-personalized flow, whether you want to call it a proactive flow or high-touch flow. The Agoji sequence flow that Sam Nelson came that way back in the day, or any of the cluster ones now. So your high touch one that is really for your economic buyer, your ATLs, your people that you know have the decision. And then you have the same type of flow and the exact same setup of a flow for your BTLs or your champions. This allows the SDR to customize the messaging with additional information or triggers, whatever they find on that prospect. There's a lot of manual touches there. The structure stays the same, but they follow the same structure flow. The reason that you do that is that this allows you to not only have a very predictive daily input needed, but you can measure it and you can prescribe exactly to your SDRs on a daily basis how many people they should be putting in one of your ATL proactive flows versus the BTL proactive flow, because the days that the manual tasks line up over time will stack. And so you can see if you're adding 6 people to an ATL sequence and then 6 people to a BTL sequence, on day 2, you're making a phone call. Day 3, you're writing a new email. And over time, you can see what's the most manual steps I think my team can do without overloading themselves. And then you layer in some of your warming stuff that's more automated. Obviously, you're going to have leads come in, so you need to have lead specific flows as well. But you have to start with that top mind of what is the point of this flow that I'm creating? And what does that categorize under? And ultimately, you can either turn up or turn down the number of inputs needed based on your own conversion rates that you see through those flows. And that way, it's all about maximizing the SDR's ability to execute at the highest level versus potentially get yourself in trouble where they're just not completing tasks anymore because there's no structure or recommended way to add people in from an outbound perspective.
Awesome. I was just looking at the results of our poll. The biggest challenge seems to be creating tailored messages for each segment. I don't know if you guys have any best practices there, what works, what doesn't work in terms of tailoring your messages. I recently had a BDR reach out to me. The timing was perfect. It was upcoming for the 49ers game. So she was teasing me to do a wager which team is going to win. So that worked really well. I did respond to her. So I don't know what worked for you guys in the past in terms of tailoring messages. But
Yeah, I could take a stab at this one. So yeah, personalization, which I'm guessing is the same as tailoring here, all sorts of different ways to do it. The way my team does it a lot right now, we actually use Scribe. So we'll look at a few different data points based off their LinkedIn, use Scribe, make sure there's a LeanData value prop, let the AI kind of do the work for us. And then from there, we'll cater and tweak the messaging as needed. But for a lot of these enterprise accounts, we're usually looking for certain triggers as we're researching and then trying to tie our research into that certain prospects. We'll go after quite a few different people per account. Some of them we'll try to figure out if they're the right person. We'll spend more time personalizing them. And then if they're maybe a good looking title, but we're not 100% sure, and we're not quite sure if we want to spend time on them yet, we'll plug them into an automated sequence and let that do the work for us and then move them over as they warm up. But that's how we do things here. But yeah, I would love to hear maybe Jack's take on this.
Sure. Yeah. So certainly it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but everybody's going to have a bit of a different value prop of the different ICP contacts they are going after. And an easy thing that you could ask yourself is just putting yourself in the buyer's shoes. If I am a VP of marketing or a IT director or really the role that you're looking in, what are the main challenges that I would encounter and tailoring it around that? So I think a lot of times we talk a lot about kind of that first and second line personalization too. I always encourage people to include a PS after their name in an email as well, because you're able to sandwich some personalization in there too. That gets your name above the Google cutoff of sincerely Jack. If you put a PS, Google's going to put that above that kind of little 3-dot ellipses. And when you have what I would consider like sandwich personalization, you have a better likelihood that they'll read more into the meat of your email there as well. So I've had a lot of good success with just having some type of relevant information into there. And sometimes you can even have more of an impact statement in your PS that might not even necessarily be personalized. So for example, a lot of the value prop that we offer at my company, Inveterate, is contribution margin. So we're helping brands make more revenue on their orders. So I could have my first line being, hi, XYZ personal note based on maybe some of their experience or a relevant thing that has to do with their company and news that they have there, the meat of my email, and then PS, an impact statement. If we could add an extra $30 in contribution margin to your first orders, what type of impact do you think that would have? I've had a lot of success with that as far as more creative ways to add personalization. And I encourage SDRs, AEs even to do that in almost every outbound email, having some type of PS there too, because that can garner some attention.
I think when it comes to like creating the core, if you have a product marketing team who's done the analysis to know, like getting with them and understanding deeply at the persona level, that the least amount of customization we should ever have is the role that they're in. Like from there, you go to the company, it's a little bit more specific. From there, you go to the individual or the team. So the very least we should ever have is that persona based level. What are the common challenges and pains? So we can at least take a shot. What I've done on top of that in the past is that if you're selling B2B, likely you have an internal team somewhere that is using what you're selling because every company likely has that department, that team. So if you can create like a once a quarter meet up with them and have them come with some prepared questions, almost like a Q&A format, say, hey, what does the data life look like for you? What are the things you actually struggle with? Have these questions and have your SDR team and your sales team attend to ask live questions. Say, what was it like when you used a competitor before you came here? What's been better about it? What's been worse about it? That can also help you create unique insights, because a lot of times we ask those questions and we get answers that we never would have got from anybody else because we have a sales lens on the question versus just trying to understand a persona in broad strokes. So if you're having trouble coming up with compelling messaging or refreshing it as the market changes, because their challenges will also change, having that quarterly touch, if you sell marketing automation, go talk to your marketing team, ask them how they're using it, what else they've used before, why it's better now, what's the challenges today, what are they focused on as a company? Because likely at least the persona level, going to be very similar to who you're selling to.
I want to move on to the next topic. During our part 1 webinar, we briefly touched on testing and improving sequences. One of the key takeaways was from one of the speakers was like, test and improve on a weekly basis, run a lot of A/B tests. I want to hear from you guys how you guys approach testing and improving sequences. Maybe we'll start with you, Nate, first, because you had a very specific approach at Gong.
Yeah. So I think that testing a flow versus testing each step in a flow is different. So you can have totally different flows targeted at the same personas. It's hard to say one flow versus the other because there's so many variables. So I think the first thing you have to do is you have to get at least 200, like a good sample size. I use 250 people going through whatever step I'm testing. It could be more or less for you, but you want to make sure you have enough impressions, enough people go through, regardless if it takes 6 months or one day, have to have enough interactions to get good data to make a decision. The other piece I'd say is that you should only test one variable at a time. We have a lot of A/B testing happening pretty much all the time. And it's not so much at one flow versus another, because like I mentioned, the way we structured flows, it's very much the same type of prospecting. We're more concerned with the templates that we have, the days between steps, like little things like that we'll actually test within an existing flow, because we have our flow built. Now we want to improve that flow versus completely scrapping the strategy, starting over with something new entirely. I think it's important you only pick one variable to A/B test at a time, get 250 people through it, pick the winner, and then pick another thing to iterate on. 250 people through it, iterate, so you're constantly getting better.
Jake, you want to go next?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Nate's running the show over here when it comes to like really building out that stuff from a leadership perspective. And I totally agree. He would be my boss in this scenario for kind of like how we would approach that strategy. But really on my end, I think that sometimes we can get caught up in maybe like you look at an article about, hey, you need to have a 5% click-through rate and a 30% open rate for the sequence that you build. And that first sequence that you're building might not be giving those results. I think that's okay as long as you're continuing to make sure that you're just improving of that initial benchmark that you've gotten from that first stab at your sequence. And if you're not getting 25, 30% open rates and 5% click-through rates on your first go round, that's okay. I would say run that for about 2 weeks to maybe a month, start getting some data points and just trying to improve off of that. To Nate's point as well, you don't want to change a ton of variables all at once either. Having small, just one variable at a time. The cool thing is that you can have different sequences with different prospects running at the same time. So you can bucket those. So if we have that, just to use his figure, we have that 250 cohort of prospects that we're putting into one sequence. I'm sure that there are 250 other prospects that we can just bucket into another sequence that are around comparable to personas, companies, and things like that. But my advice would just be don't benchmark yourself off of like a blog post of the numbers that you need to be reaching. Benchmark yourself on really the results that you're getting to start with and just work on improving those. If you only have a 10% open rate, focus on trying to get to 12 to 15 and to 20 from there.
Joe, what's your take on improving sequences?
Yeah, Nate and Jack covered a lot of the same points, but the biggest thing is just having enough data to make changes with confidence, right? If you're not running enough prospects through whatever you're trying to test, you're going to make changes and not feel great about it. You got to be patient, give yourself some time to collect the data you need and be able to change a variable with some confidence. One thing that I think we do here a lot, especially post-COVID, is we do a lot of different events here at LeanData. And I will say leading up to an event, you do have to make changes more frequently, test different iterations. If you're outbounding to an event and it's about a month away, you probably want to review that every week and see what's working and what do I need to adjust. But if it's just your normal cold outbound and you're chasing accounts month in, month out, then you probably want to do more of a quarterly review and see how things are measuring over a period of 3 months.
Moving on to our last question here before we go into the hot takes. I'm really excited about the hot takes, but we talked a lot about what type of sequences, how to test sequences. What are some of the metrics you guys actually pay attention to when looking at sequences? And Nate, you had a very good point that you brought up during the rehearsals. Like, doesn't matter what numbers you look at, always try to improve every day. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think, and this is not a knock, I follow a lot of LinkedIn influencers that are all masters of outbounding, and no one's ever done it like they did it. They're the best. There's some great stuff out there. But like what Jack was saying earlier, like the most important benchmarks are your own. Like whatever you're doing today, like just try to get a little bit better in it, because there's way too many variables between who you're selling to, what your messaging looks like, how you're formatting, what time you're sending it at, all that stuff. But whatever your benchmarks are, whatever you're tracking to get better at, you should always use your own. Just because someone else says they're doing 30% click-through rate and 25% reply rate, we can't validate that. We don't actually know what sample size. There's too many questions to really say, oh, I suck now because I'm only getting 20%. So take your own numbers, consistently try to get better. And I know we're going to touch on which ones we look at. Do you want me to go into that as well? Or do you want me to hold off till we get to that point? Like which specific KPIs?
Yeah, let's go into like right now. Yeah,
Cool.
If you want to cover it.
Yes. There's a lot about open rates that I wanted to touch on. I think the open rate used to be super reliable, but it might not be super exciting for people, or they may not agree with me, but that's okay. I don't think they're reliable anymore. I think the click-through rate and reply rate are really where it's at. Might agree, might not, but spam bots are just way smarter than they used to be. They open emails sometimes multiple times, which throws off your whole way you're calculating. If you're sending a couple of the same email to the same company, they all get open. That's going to make your sequence look increasingly better, and maybe it's not. Maybe we have an actual issue with links and we're not able to uncover that. Open without a reply also doesn't really matter, in my opinion. If you get an open without a reply, that means good job. You had a subject line that was compelling, but your email wasn't good enough to elicit even like any kind of reply. So it's not necessarily a positive thing either. So for me, it all comes down to your reply rates. And if you're getting more sophisticated, you should use some type of an AI or something to generate you a sentiment score. So you can get an idea across all of the emails that have been sent out from this particular flow or this particular person on my team. What's the general sentiment? Is it generally positive or negative replies? Because if someone responds unsubscribe, that's a false flag. Also, you don't necessarily want to count that as a positive. So being able to have the sentiment score aggregated at scale for you saves a ton of time and helps you quickly realize, okay, we get a lot of replies, but not good ones. We need to change the sequence or change the flow or change some of the messaging. But Jack, I know you send probably a ton of emails in your position. What do you view as good?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more on the open rate one. I encounter that a lot, and I've noticed that just as a trend where you'll send out an email and then you'll immediately see that email is opened. And that's clearly not from that prospect that you're sending it to. That's some type of like spam bot that you're referring to. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. The open rate, if I'm only seeing one open for an email, that's not necessarily making me say, oh, that is like a highly engaged prospect. And I would even say another way you can be a little bit more judicious about it is the time to open. If they're opening it immediately, that's probably some type of a spam bot. So just that's a little bit more of a manual peeling that layer deeper. But if there's one particular prospect or one particular account that you're really trying to be more thoughtful about, you're probably keeping track of stuff like that. I agree that things related to clicking on links, what links they're clicking, if you have visibility to that too, I think is also pretty compelling, to where if you're calling out a specific piece of content and that's the link that they're clicking into and that's the only thing that you've sent, that's a good sign. And if getting 2 or 3 on a spread out time frame, that's also a good indicator. I have not done anything on the sentiment score though, but that's not that I don't think that's a good idea. I just never knew that was a thing. So I like that idea. I think that's a really good one because it's a really good point. If you're getting unsubscribe emails or negative feedback back, remove me from your list or things like that, yes, that's a reply, but it's not a good one. And yeah, I think the sentiments. Are there any like apps that might be like a little bit on the more affordable side on the sentiment score that you would recommend, or does Gong do that already?
Yeah, if you get on the roadmap with engagement, you'll have a sentiment score to get an idea of aggregated from all the responses over here. What's the overall sentiment score? It's in there now, but yeah, I work here. So of course, go to Engage, check it out. Let me know if you want a demo. We'll set it up.
Joe, any like thoughts on metrics?
Yeah. Nate really hit the nail in the coffin. His bots, even for me, I've been an SDR last year, and you'll see several opens, especially at Jack's point. If it's an immediate open, and in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's a red flag. Like it's probably a spam bot, not something I can trust. So really just for me, I've switched just measuring replies. I think it's the source of truth. It's the only thing you can really like trust with confidence, especially with the way things are moving spam bot wise. But yeah, Nate covered it all.
What are the measures? The sentiment score I think is important. But if you're using a sales engagement platform, make sure it's connected to your CRM. Make sure it has by function or by syncing on your opportunities, because if you have a high sequence to operate as well, you can pull out. That's an incredibly valuable stat to see. Not just getting positive replies, but also how many of the 100 people you're putting into flow are turning into an opportunity within the next 2 or 3 months. Like a last touch flow kind of a thing, or last touch sequence type of thing. Also incredibly valuable. It's more lagging because it takes a long time, but ultimately you can measure like how quality are the positive sentiment replies also. Are they actually leading to who you're targeting and stuff? And is it the right person? But something else to look at, if you have a sales engagement platform that's disconnected from the CRM at opportunity levels, take a look at that, or again, give me a call because Gong will help you.
One thing I want to chime in too, just because something came in on the chat that I think is also great, just related to replies. I know we were talking a lot about reply rates, but just Seth, I see, calls out also like an out of office reply. That might not necessarily be like a positive reply as well, but this is a little secret fun stuff for us sales reps out there. Oftentimes in an out of office reply, included in that prospect's email signature is their direct mobile phone number. And so keep an eye out for those emails that you get, because those are great to utilize for calling the prospect or even texting them. I even had a Canadian prospect this morning that I WhatsApp messaged, and it worked out. I got the meeting rebooked because he didn't show up to the call. And so, yeah, whatever you can do to make that work. The out of office emails are super valuable for just more data that you can get, besides the awesome data that we get from LeadIQ. LeadIQ does a great job on the mobile numbers.
Yeah. And just to follow up on Jack's point too, Thanksgiving is around the corner. So if you got some prospects that you've been dying to try and get in front of, you might want to schedule some emails to be sent around Thanksgiving and see if you can scrape their mobile numbers then. So yeah, just an idea coming up here.
All right, I want to save some time for Q&A. So let's jump into our hot takes for today. First hot take: cold calling is dead. Yay or nay? Joe, you want to go first?
Oh yeah. Been waiting for this one. I'm a big cold caller, always have been. Love having conversations and talking. I think most salespeople do. So no, I do not think cold calling is dead. If it is dead, you're probably not doing it the right way. And I'm happy to help. So reach out to me on LinkedIn if you need some help, maybe getting set up. But no, cold calling is great. Whether you're going to be an SDR, AE, AM, CSM, maybe even go into operations, at some point, you're going to have to use your voice and be able to talk about the product and company you work for. It's better to lean into it. And from a sales perspective, the more conversations you can actually have with your prospects and create a line of communication with them, it makes sending a follow-up email even easier and just building a relationship with them. And that way, when you're scheduling a meeting and maybe they're starting to ghost you, you can give them a ring and they know who you are, they know your face, they know your voice. So a big believer in calling. I think it's the quickest way to get a meeting. So all for it. But yeah, I'd love to hear the other takes. I know, Jack, you're a full cycle rep right now, so I'm sure you do a lot of cold calling yourself, but yeah, I would love to hear.
Yeah. Hey, I'll even just make it a little bit more fun too and break the fourth wall out of just sales right now. In life, you're going to need to call people for different things. You're going to need to cold call the restaurant to get a reservation that you really want to get. You might need to cold call a significant other or a crush that you have to set up a date. You're going to need to cold call an uncle or an aunt that you haven't talked to in a while and you want to get in touch with, or maybe a brother or a sister that you're in a fight with. So I consider cold calling in sales as just life prep for anything that comes your way and picking up the phone and kind of getting things done. And that's the fun part about sales team is that we do a lot of things all day long to bring those opportunities in, to earn those commissions, to build the business. But a lot of the skills that we're doing here also apply in real life in a lot of really positive ways. And so I think personally, cold calling not only is a valuable tool that you can use in your sales org to be successful, but I also think it's just a very important life skill to have that is a bit of dying art. So pick up the phone, even if you don't necessarily think it's the best thing for your professional development, it's a really good thing for your life development.
I love that. That's awesome.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Also, don't believe that cold calling is dead. We book about well over 60% of our meetings every month are booked over the phone in that manner. So it's live and here at Gong. Definitely agree with that too. It's a life skill. If it's something you're not comfortable with doing, how are you ever going to present to a buyer at the end of the day if you're not comfortable jumping on the phone and facing potential rejection? And I also think, Joe, you said something around it's the fastest way to get a yes. It's also the fastest way to get a no. So you're not wasting your time on people that are just never going to open your email. You're writing great stuff. They're just not opening. Just call them up and they're going to tell you no or yes pretty quick. So I think it's the fastest way to also get an outcome, which we know is super important to do. We don't want to spend time where we're not efficient or getting something out of it in sales.
Great. It looks like the audience agrees. Cold calling is not dead. So awesome. Next hot take, and this is a good one for both Joe and Nate, since they're both SDR leaders. The hot take is the SDR model is broken. Yay or nay?
I'm
Nate, go
on
first.
this one. I just want to see.
Well, I'm happy to take a stab first then.
Sure.
Nate can be the grand finale here. Being a sales leader, no, SDR model is not broken. But I do think you have to be smarter. You can't spray and pray the way maybe things were 10, 15 years ago and hope to get some results. You have to be very strategic and prepare and research. It's hard to have a conversation with prospects nowadays. So when you do get the opportunity, whether it's a connect or you're sending an email, it's really important to just be dialed in ahead of time. So you're prepared to have that conversation because it's harder to cut through the noise nowadays, but no, I don't think we're being replaced or anything like that, but I'm sure Nate will have a good take here. So Nate, let's hear it.
Yeah. When I became an SDR, I think it was like 2017, we were using Yesware and mail merging. And I personally would send 1,985 emails every day because 2,000 was the limit. And it was like, you just set up your mail merge, you blast it. That model, absolutely dead. Joe made exactly the points I'd make. You have to be a lot smarter. It's not about sitting back and letting these generative models do the work for you, but it's about how can you maximize your efficiency now that we don't have to do as much of the grunt work that we used to. So those that can wield the sword are going to be the ones that get to carry it. Those that don't are going to die by it. It's just how it's going to go. Because we know what happens with SDR teams that do well. Sales leadership wants to get more SDRs. They don't want to fire the SDRs or downsize it when they're doing well. So if you can get your team to perform well, leveraging this technology, it's only going to amplify the impact that we have on the organization, which is the purpose anyway. So you can view it as like a, oh, I'm afraid of what's coming, or you can look at it as a, oh, great, now I don't have to do this. Where else can I go add additional value? How can I get things further down the line? How can I drive things if you're using a sales methodology, like further down and get more medic out of it? So definitely don't think it's dead, but I do think it's adapting and shifting. And if you're not learning all the time anyway and getting better, like you're dying anyway. So it's just another thing you got to learn and get better alongside.
Jack, as an AE,
Yep.
what's your opinion?
I would die to have a couple SDRs right now, man. I'm a full cycle. I think the fun part, and this is also just, I think, really inspiring to myself and probably a lot of the people are on the call too. Today's SDRs are tomorrow's VPs of sales and sales leaders. And I started as an SDR in my role, early stage in ecom SaaS. Nate, it's awesome that you started in the SDR role too. And now you're running the show. And so to his point, which I agree, maybe the spray and pray model, yeah, certainly. I don't know any sales leader that recommends that. And it's the reps, it's the individuals that really try to be creative, take their job, and don't think of the SDR role as something to be embarrassed about, but something that to be proud of and excited about and to improve themselves on. Those are the people that have the creative mind. Those are the people that move up into the leadership ladder faster, make more money, and really just have more fun in their role, as opposed to maybe considering it as something that is like a low level, bottom of the totem pole type thing. I actually remember when I first had my first interview with the company that I started at, I made a comment of, I'm just really excited. I'm totally okay with joining the company at the bottom of the totem pole and like contributing to grow. And they actually roasted me on that. They were like, you're not the bottom of the totem pole. If you think that you are, that's the wrong mindset to be approaching this. You actually have probably one of the most important roles at the company, and take it with pride. It's a really sweet job to have. And we make a lot of money in sales because we're creative and we work hard. And the only way to get into that is taking that early stage role as an SDR. So, hurrah, SDRs. That's all.
Love it. Awesome. And the audience agrees, nay, the SDR model is not broken. Fantastic. So let's move on to our last hot take, text messaging as part of an outbound sequence. Yay or nay? Joe.
Yeah, we don't build them into our sequences here, but I have gotten some success through texting. Usually the way it'll go is you're calling people and they'll decline your call and they'll text, who is this? And to me, I take that as permission to like, okay, cool. I can engage you via text now. A little hesitant being a sales leader, but SDR texted me and I never chatted with you before, seen your name. I would definitely be a little turned off. That's an aggressive tactic, but I have found success from it. So that's certainly something that is probably being used, but yeah, I would love to hear the thoughts from the other guys.
I think it's something that people are dipping their toe in, because it is not, you're like, we always find ways to become invasive as salespeople to the people we want to talk to. Like whether it's their, like you take a picture from their Instagram and you put it in an email and send to them and it's a little bit creepy. Like we'll put that barrier of what's appropriate, what's not to get a conversation. But I think it's a yes here, because every other form of technology we use to get in touch with people, it's a yes with a caveat on, you got to know who your audience is. If you're selling to an audience that's more risk averse, they're more introverted, they don't really like that, probably not going to make a lot of great impressions by doing that. I think it's a great point that Joe made. If they text me, like it's open seated now. Like you've texted me, I'm going for it. But if you're going to do it, don't make it a pitch about your product. You got to add value, because now you're like a text message from them. It's really intimate. It's really close. It's really personal. It's a really quick way to just really bother somebody if you just start texting them pitches. So if you're going to text them, make sure that it's value driven. There's a reason for it. You have a good trigger. It's not just basically taking email and going to text with it and blasting.
I've got some fun stuff on this one to share. So yes, I think texting is awesome and I use it all the time. I don't necessarily use it in cold outreach though. It's more of like a phase 2. So I'll start with this. In my booking link, I require the prospect to put in their phone number. And it's pretty innocuous if somebody's booking a time and they have to put in their email and phone number, they usually don't think of it very much when they do that. Now, I find that very important for if they're no showing a call. So maybe if they're not on the call right away or in 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm working super hard to get that meeting on the calendar in the first place, I'll probably call them first, or I'll text them, or sometimes I'll even FaceTime them if they're not like getting on the line or have it engage with me as a bit of a pattern interrupt type thing. That's a fun one. And actually, you'd be surprised on how often I get engagement from people answering a FaceTime call. This is more so just as like early stage type stuff. We don't have a virtual phone caller at the moment with a tool like Outreach. So like I'm actually using my personal phone for this, but like this, this is a bit of a hot take as well, but I have an iPhone. They get the blue bubble text from me via iMessage as opposed to the green bubble from Android. That is a bit of that lowers the guard a little bit as well. If I see the blue bubble, that's usually not only a good indicator that it's the right phone number, but they're receiving a blue bubble. That's a little bit lower defenses as well. I never did this myself, but I will share a successful tactic that another rep at my old company would do. He would send videos via Instagram to these prospects as well. So he would find their Instagram and he would send them like a little selfie video. Hey, sending you this note. Think this could be interesting. So that's an interesting one as well. And the last one that I will put on everybody's radar outside of texting, because my answer is yes, I think texting is good if you're tactful about it. Vertical video, mobile LinkedIn videos is also a bit of a hack. So instead of recording a video on a tool like Vidyard or Loom, going onto your LinkedIn mobile app and recording a vertical selfie video to said prospect about X, Y, or Z, 15 to 30 seconds, and then sending that out. I've had a lot of really good success with that too. It's a little bit more personal. It's scratching that like reptilian itch of TikTok / Instagram reels and stuff like that too. So it's a little bit more 2023. So anyway, those are some little tactical things that I'm doing to try to get calls booked.
Got it. Looks like that's the only hot takeaway where the audience disagrees, but it's also seems to be like some comments I saw as like it's a generational thing, contextual thing, definitely not for cold outreach. I know we have 10 minutes left. Want to jump into some questions. So a couple of interesting questions around personalization. So I'm going to hopefully pull them up on the screen. Can you guys see this question from Axel? I'll read through it. Some prospects have tons of great info on their LinkedIn, personal and professional. Where should an SDR draw the line between personalization and product value? Anyone wants to take this one first? Joe?
Yeah, sure. Shout out Axel. I know who that is. Yeah, it's a tough line. I think one thing that helps me when trying to navigate this is understanding that first email you're sending, you don't need to include everything you know about the prospect or all of the research you've done. It's okay to maybe just pick one or two points or research or what you know and start there. And then that gives you some subsequent emails to follow up with where you can bring in other points of personalization. But I like to keep the first touch about them, maybe a problem to try to pique curiosity and not really too much about the product. And then if that doesn't get them biting, and then you can start to sprinkle in some stuff about what you guys do, the company you work for, et cetera. But Jack, I'm sure you write tons of cold emails right now. Might have some good points on this.
Yeah, for sure. So I typically would try to, if you can find something personal about them, that's usually going to be cooler. So maybe that's something that they do in their LinkedIn bio that they might have a little bit more information on, like themselves, the person. Sometimes that's a little bit tougher to find. And so that's more so where I would go to maybe news that's happening with the company or updates that they have. It's a little bit, I personally in the e-commerce space have a little bit of an advantage because typically the people I'm reaching out to are like making cool products. And so I can make more of a comment around cool things that they're selling or new launches that they've had, or maybe even things about the brand story. That's cool. So that's what I'll lean into. So the thing is though, oftentimes you don't want to be spending all day long on personalization because you're just not going to be able to get the volume out that you need to. So usually I'll maybe try to have something a little bit more relevant to the product value and the impact that it's having, because that is a personal thing being the challenge, but you can get that a little bit more at volume. So from there, I guess this is another good thing of the measuring success of that sequence and then maybe moving them into a more impactful sequence. If you're seeing a lot of activity from that maybe general personalized business impact sequence, pausing them in that one and then moving them into more of a high touch where you're being a little bit more surgical, I've had some good results from.
Nate, any takes on that?
Yeah, a lot of things were covered well. And my thinking is that there's always something that can feel personalized, even if it's not about them specifically. You can look at, what are their competitors doing in the space? What are their competitors focused on? What's happening in the industry? What's happening at their company level? Is there any kind of news going out about anything you're working on? If you're lucky enough to be in the enterprise, you can look through 10Ks and there's a lot of things happening. If they're public, if they're private, it can be a little bit more difficult, but you can still look at competitors and make an educated guess at what they probably care about. Because the one thing that you really want to steer away from is product value is always great. The product value doesn't mean anything if they don't understand why it matters to them. So you have to be able to draw that line, whether it's from individual customization, whether it's from persona-based customization, company-based or industry-based or competitor-based. There's always something you can use that people generally care about, or at least be able to connect the dots from. So I think that there's always some level of personalization you can go to. And I know everyone's familiar with the rule 3x3, like you don't want to burn your whole day looking for stuff. So that's why it's so important you have flows or templates that you can leverage around the persona or around the vertical or the industry, so that if you can't find anything on them, you're not going to spend too much time. And then to Jack's point, if you see elevated engagement from them, then maybe go pull them out, make a few more phone calls on them. But there's always something you can pull from to talk about them and what they're doing before talking about you and what you sell.
Great. This is a question specifically for Nate, but probably I'd love to get Joe's and Jack's answer as well. I'm going to pull this one up here. How frequent are your touch points when reaching out to prospects?
So again, depends on the type of flow they're put into. If it's a high touch cadence, it's very similar to, if you're not familiar with it, the Goji sequence that Sam Nelson created a while back. It's essentially, there's 3 touches in the first day. Second day, you're going to have another phone call. The third day, you're going to have an automated bump email. Then day 4, you're going to make another phone call. But it's pretty high frequency on those. If it's something that's more account warming or value, like we don't really know much about them, we just need to have something happening, that's good. Like 1 email, maybe every 7 or 8 business days. So every week and a half or so, just to start getting in front of them, putting content that might be relevant in front of them. So it really depends on the type of flow. So I don't know if they want to say what type of prospecting you're talking about, because the flow is going to vary a lot based on the type of prospecting you're actually doing. If we have a couple of stages we've varied in there, we've added in a couple of some more social touches. We found that to be really successful. But generally, if it's a super high touch cadence, we'll have probably 16 touches, some type of touch, unique touches over the first 13 days. So it's pretty high touch, 13 business days, I should say. So it ends up being over about 3 weeks. And we'll touch them hard. And then it goes to like once every 4 or 5 days, and then it kind of falls off. And then from there, if there's no engagement, we'll put them into a longer term flow of engagement or value add. It's going to be 1 every 7 or 8 days. And then we'll let them cool off for about 30 days. And then they'll go back in to the right person for a high touch. So again, it comes down to who you're actually trying to sell to. You're maybe selling to an industry or a persona that's more likely to respond positively to high touch, or you're going to be selling to someone that's going to get annoyed. So you got to also know who you're selling to a little bit, but it all comes down to the type of prospecting, the type of flow that they're in. That will vary and determine the time between touches.
I know we have 3 minutes left. One last question here. What tool do you use to measure the task capacity for your SDRs?
It's a combination. So before coming to Gong, it was a Google sheet. Like I used a sheet and I figured out I had to export a ton of our CRM data, create some pivot tables, and ask GPT how to make it fit the right way. So it's a lot of manual stuff that way. Now we're using that in Gong. We can measure everything that's happening through Engage to know what is the total capacity, where we start getting that diminishing return from customization, like we start falling off. So we're using Gong for that today. Gong Engage.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't necessarily use something specific. I probably like Nate, more like just measuring things on my own, building stuff out in a spreadsheet. But yeah, super interesting, Nate. Definitely send me some more information. Hope we learn more.
Yeah, will do.
I'm not sure if this answered the question, but I think we used Atrium in the past. That was a good engagement tool just to benchmark things.
Fantastic. I know we have a ton more questions left, but unfortunately we're running out of time, so we might have to save this for round 3. But I want to thank Nate, Joe, and Jack for joining us today. It was very insightful for me. Again, there's a part 1 to this conversation that we will share with you as well, and we'll share the recording later via email. That's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Fine. See ya.